The United States' most prolific serial killer. 93 confessions of murder. 50 confirmed victims by the FBI. Today is the story of Samuel Little. Samuel Little, aka Samuel McDowell, aka the Choke and Stroke Killer. Named the Choke and Stroke Killer because while he choked his victims, he would masturbate. G'day there everyone, welcome to Bedtime Crime, a channel dedicated to telling you stories about serial killers, murder stories and much more. This is for all of you out there who love to listen to crime stories just before you go to sleep. But of course, you can watch and listen to these videos whenever you want. So remember to like and subscribe and let me know if there are any stories or crime-related topics you want me to cover. Let's get into it. Samuel Little. Born on June 7th, 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia, the United States. His mother, a sex worker, was only 16 years old at the time of Little's birth. However, later, Little's mother abandoned him when he was just a toddler. Little was then raised by his grandmother, but from an early age, Little was already making a name for himself. He went to a reform school in Ohio for stealing a bicycle. He left home in his teens and was also a high school dropout. Though not all high school dropouts go on to be criminals, Little's life continued to be surrounded by crime. In 1971, when Little was in his early 30s, he was reported to have committed his first murder. But before that, he was in and out of prison for many types of offences, such as robbery and assault. However, the list goes on. Though he had a nomadic lifestyle travelling from state to state, he was able to hold a relationship. One of Little's first committed relationships was with Lucy Madero. Madero was arrested with Little after they robbed a petrol station. It was in prison where Madero met Little's future girlfriend in Aurelia Jean Dorsey. After Madero told Dorsey that she was going to testify against Little, Dorsey got into contact with Little to warn him. Little and Dorsey began their relationship after being released from prison, which ended up lasting 30 years until Dorsey's death in 1988. But before her death, Little and Dorsey would go on to commit many robberies throughout the country. However, at night, Little would go on to commit his solo crimes: kidnapping, rape, and murder. From the time that Little and Dorsey were together, it is estimated that Little had killed over 40 victims. With the exception of 3 transgender women and a number of Caucasian and Hispanic women on his victims list, Little was mainly attracted to African American females. Though he preferred one race, a certain physical part of the body was most important to him. This was the neck of a female. In fact, his infatuation could have stemmed back from as early as 4 years old. When speaking to the police, he recalls a vivid memory of him being attracted to his teacher's neck.
Pick the ones that you think you're going to kill
No,
first.
no. If you want, depends on how the neck look. Got a smooth neck and turn. As a child, I got attracted to
The neck part.
Yeah.
So you pick them out by the way that their neck looks, because if the neck looks good, then there might be somebody that you want to have sex with, or somebody that you might want to kill. What's the top? Both.
The neck of a female seemed to outweigh any other characteristics. Quoted by saying, "It wouldn't matter if she was skinny or ugly. It depends on how her neck looks."
The other stuff really don't be important to me. She could be skinny and narrow.
Right.
She could be ugly.
She could be fat. She could be skinny.
Yeah, she ain't gonna be fat because the fat one's neck is
Right. Too
can't see.
much. Right. Yeah.
Little, for for a lack of a better word, was smart when it came to choosing his victims. Quoted by saying, "Well, I'm not going to go over there into a white neighborhood and pick out the little young teenage girl like them idiots do, you know?" Therefore, most of Little's victims were prostitutes or drug addicts. In many cases, these two characteristics of the victim would go hand in hand. Little knew that these were the ideal victims, as many prostitutes or drug addicts were usually wanderers, just like him, or have been abandoned by their own families and society. Therefore, it would be very difficult to find a next of kin or a contact. In those days, police would also spend a lot less time investigating on the deaths of the homeless, prostitutes, or drug addicts. And it was one of the reasons why Little was able to do what he did for so long. If it wasn't obvious already, Little's main way of killing his victims was strangling. Little had a strong desire to own his victims, to play with them, like they were his property.
He didn't know who the hell was doing it. Yeah. I would go back to the same city sometimes and pluck me another grape. I said, how many grapes? So y'all got on to find him.
Sure.
That one right over.
There's a good one, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll take
that's
that.
a good one.
Quoted saying, "I get no kick out of shooting no girls." Strangling is the second most popular method for serial killers to kill their victims, the first being shooting.
Did you ever shoot any of these girls?
Shoot.
Yeah, with a gun?
And
Just your hands?
without that, I wouldn't want to do it.
Strangling is said to be more personal for serial killers. For Little, it was an intimate time where he strangled his victims, while at the same time he would often masturbate. Though he was a strong man, he was also a boxer at a young age. It still would have been quite hard for him to strangle and pleasure himself at the same time. So in many cases, Little drugged his victims, often taking drugs with them to lessen the suspicious behavior. Once they were incapacitated, he then would strangle them. There were times that Little chose not to drug his victims as well. He would often choke the victim to the point of passing out, then lessen the grip in order for them to gain some consciousness back. He would then proceed to strangle them until their eventual death. He seemed to have enjoyed having the power and literally having someone else's life in his hands. Choking his victims while they were unconscious may have also helped with him being undetected for so long. Since there was no struggle or fight back from the victims due to incapacitation, it would reduce the amount of marks or damage to the body. It was reported that many times police would name the cause of death as an overdose or natural causes. Though Little has confessed to killing over 93 women, we will only concentrate on his very first victim. On the 31st of December 1970, Little met a lady by the name of Mary Jo Brosley.
The first victim I had was in by January, February of 1970,
Okay,
over in Miami, Coconut Grove, Miami.
yeah. First killing, did you know that you wanted to kill her?
Yeah, I had desire, strong desire to f***ing kill her.
Mary physically was not the typical look of Little's preferred victims that he would later go on to murder. Mary was Caucasian. She was also said to be anorexic and frail. However, one common factor Mary would share among Little's future victims was that she was estranged from her family. She was known to be a heavy drinker and would often be seen with many different men. After a night of drinking, Little took Mary in his car to an area just outside of Miami. Things started to get a little hot and heavy. He started playing with Mary's necklace and admiring her neck, and, well, you know what happened next. Little was reported to have been arrested over 100 times before finally being charged. However, even though he was arrested so many times, a lot of the cases he was linked to were dismissed. It was reported that Little was almost caught several times before. He was tied to the murders of Melinda Rose Lapre and Patricia Mount in the early 80s. Patricia Mount's body was found, and unlucky for Little, he left evidence behind that linked him to the murder. However, even with evidence pointing to him being at the crime scene, the jury found him not guilty. For Melinda Lapre, she was so heavily decomposed when she was found that no physical evidence was able to be used to convict Little. Another account that Little recalled was when he was almost caught with a dead body in his car. A police officer approached Little's car and shined a light into it.
I was lucky in Florida. I got the car and tried to act like I was zipping my pants. He said, "Oh, what the fuck? What's going on over here?" I said, "Nothing." I said, "Me and my wife just having a course."
Luckily for Little, the police officer accepted his response and asked him to move on. If the police officer just took an extra couple of seconds to consider the woman in the car, maybe he could have saved the lives of Little's future victims. However, no one is blaming him for not. It wasn't until September 2012 when his terrible crimes caught up with him. Little was arrested on an outstanding drug charge in Kentucky and extradited back to California. A DNA test was carried out which linked him to 3 unsolved murders from 1987 to 1989. On September 25th, 2014, Little was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the deaths of 3 women. The names of the victims were Carol Eileen Elford, Audrey Everett Nelson, and Guadalupe Durate Apodaca. All 3 murders were said to have been committed in the LA district. Later on, Little went on to confess to over 90 crimes during his notorious life. In May 2018, Little agreed to be interviewed by police investigators regarding his past. 700 hours of videos were shot, and what came out of these interviews was nothing short of mind-blowing. Not only did Little go on to confess 93 women that he claimed to have murdered, he would seem to be a natural at remembering, as he was able to draw his victims in great detail, as well as go into specific information about certain victims that also matched autopsy reports many years later.
She was a heavy-set, big old yellow gal and had buck teeth.
I recommend in your spare time to go back and watch his interviews in full. Samuel Little died on December 30th, 2020, one day short of his 50th anniversary of his first killing. He was aged 80. And that was the story of Samuel Little, aka the Choke and Stroke Killer, America's most prolific serial killer. I found this case to be very interesting, especially the interviews, though it is not unusual for serial killers to not show any remorse for their actions. There was something about Little that struck me. He seemed quite cheerful when talking about his victims. His tone was like if he was talking to you about something happy and uplifting, almost like a granddad telling his grandchildren a story of his past. He seemed to lack remorse or any sympathy towards most of his victims. He wasn't angry. He definitely showed no regret. He was able to give clear descriptions of his victims one by one, almost like he was reading from a book. Though serial killers are not all alike, there are some common things that they might do. They might take a trophy, for example, an item of clothing, taking photographs, or something more disturbing, keeping a body part. They might want to get public attention, either by leaving a signature behind, or even going as far as to contact the media. However, Little did none of these. His only motivation seemed to be for control and sexual pleasure. A part of me does question if it was a show. Was he just making up things as he went along? However, with 50 confirmed cases from the FBI, it's hard not to take him very seriously. Even after his death, more cases have been reported to be solved. In September 2021, it was reported that the skeletal remains of a woman that was found nearly 44 years ago has now been identified as another victim to Samuel Little. Before referred to as the Escatapa Jane Doe, has now been identified as Clara Birdlong. Let's hope the detectives are able to find the identity of more victims in the future. Thank you for watching and listening. Please like and subscribe, and if there are any stories you want to hear, please let me know in the comment section. Hopefully these stories can help you get a good night's rest. See you next time.